Have you ever felt like you dodged a bullet, only to realize the real danger was never the bullet? It was what comes after? That strange relief when the storm passes, but the ground beneath you is already cracked? That's exactly where America stands today. A shock just hit the economy, not the kind that makes headlines scream, the quiet kind, the invisible kind, the kind that doesn't destroy in a day, but slowly pulls everything apart from the inside. And the worst part? Almost no one sees it coming. Stay until the end. This changes everything. Hit that like button and let's dive in. If you listen to the financial media, everything sounds wonderful. Markets climbing to record territory, analysts declaring another successful year, the narrative everywhere: America's economy is resilient, unshakable. But here's what they're not telling you. Underneath that glossy surface, the data is screaming something completely different, something I've watched unfold in every major collapse over the past 50 years. You want to understand what's really happening? Start with the most boring statistic imaginable, the one nobody talks about at cocktail parties, the one that gets zero airtime on financial news: unemployment. I know, it sounds dull, technical, forgettable, but this number has been the silent alarm before every economic disaster in modern history. Back in 2007, it climbed by 0.5%. Nobody paid attention. 12 months later, the entire financial system was in flames. The year 2000, same story, 0.5% increase. Then the 2001 recession hit like a freight train. Here we are today. Past 18 months, unemployment up 0.5%. Looks microscopic, doesn't it? But when you examine 6 decades of economic data, this tiny movement has consistently marked the exact moment tranquility transforms into catastrophe. Meanwhile, what's Wall Street doing? Celebrating, record highs, champagne corks popping, pure euphoria. It's October 2007 all over again. Remember that moment when irrational optimism silenced every warning signal, when everyone convinced themselves the danger had passed, when the foundation was crumbling beneath their feet, but the party kept going. Markets hit new peaks while unemployment quietly rose. Then the system lost more than half its value. We're watching the identical pattern right now, but there's something more dangerous this time: willful blindness. The Federal Reserve locked interest rates at levels we haven't seen since 2008. Credit costs have exploded for everyone. Households, corporations, government itself. Borrowing is getting strangled. Economic activity is slowing. Yet somehow the illusion of prosperity persists, because if the surface sparkles, who needs to look underneath? Now let's go deeper, because when you strip away the headlines and examine the actual indicators, you discover something chilling. For 3 consecutive years, the index of leading economic indicators has been declining, month after month after month. This isn't some obscure metric. This is one of the most reliable forecasting tools we have. The last time it behaved this way, right before 2001, right before 2008. This isn't speculation. This is pattern recognition, like watching storm clouds gather on the horizon, growing darker, moving closer, while everyone insists the weather's perfect. At the same time, job creation has essentially stopped. The government's own non-farm payroll numbers tell the story clearly. Hiring has collapsed. The engine that drove labor market expansion is sputtering. Push it just slightly lower into negative territory, and you trigger full contraction. Once layoffs begin spreading, confidence vanishes instantly. These shifts didn't happen overnight. They've been building, accumulating, compounding for months. But now we arrive at the catalyst, the final piece that transforms a vulnerable system into a crisis. This is what just happened, and most people completely missed it. We're witnessing the return of a force that has toppled economies throughout history, an economic weapon disguised as policy. This time, it arrived through tariffs. On the surface, tariffs seem reasonable. Just import taxes, right? Protecting American industry, balancing trade deficits, bringing manufacturing home. Sounds patriotic, sounds sensible. Here's the reality. Tariffs don't work like a scalpel. They work like a virus. They don't target one product or one sector. They infect everything: raw material costs, food prices, component availability, trade velocity. They transform certainty into doubt and doubt into paralysis. This isn't theoretical. It's happening right now. Recent months have seen wave after wave of tariff implementations, adjustments, threats. The result? Global businesses, especially American ones, thrown into chaos. Supply chains that were already fragile are now shattered, prices surging, contracts frozen, hiring plans abandoned. Before we continue, if you're finding this analysis valuable, hit that like button and subscribe. This is information the mainstream won't show you. Now, back to what's unfolding. Let me take you through the historical evidence, because this pattern isn't new. External shocks triggering economic collapse. We've seen this film before, repeatedly. The 1970s, oil shock, prices exploded, costs became unbearable, recession followed inevitably. Early 1980s, another oil crisis, same devastation. The 1990 downturn, again driven by oil. Even the tech bubble burst in 2001 and the housing catastrophe in 2008 were both preceded by massive energy price spikes that pushed the system past its breaking point. The pattern is undeniable. When energy costs or trade barriers rise too fast, economies don't adjust. They stumble. They fall. Oil specifically has functioned as the heartbeat of economic growth for generations. When oil prices surge, everything downstream gets crushed. Look at the past 70 years. With one exception, the pandemic, every major American recession was preceded by oil price explosions. On average, oil climbed roughly 150% before each downturn. That kind of increase functions like the most savage tax conceivable. Transportation costs, a P. Production costs, a P. Household expenses, a P. It strangles families and businesses simultaneously. Doesn't matter your income level, doesn't matter what you purchase. When energy costs spike, survival gets harder for everyone. Now, tariffs might not seem as dramatic as an oil crisis, but their impact remarkably similar. They inflate costs, they eliminate options, they strangle the flow of goods and capital. Research from the European Central Bank and the Federal Reserve demonstrates this clearly. A 100% increase in oil prices typically slashes GDP by approximately 5%. Most pre-recession oil spikes hit closer to 150%, which means a 7.5% GDP contraction, enough to pull an entire economy into freefall. Studies from Yale University and the World Bank show that comprehensive tariffs can trigger a 2.5% to 3% GDP reduction. Looks smaller on paper, right? But here's the critical difference. Oil shocks hurt financially. Tariffs hurt psychologically. When oil prices rise, corporations can calculate the new reality. They can adapt. They can make decisions. But when tariffs shift unpredictably, nobody knows what tomorrow brings. Will the next shipment face 10% taxation, 20%, 100%? Will trade agreements collapse overnight? That uncertainty doesn't just slow business, it paralyzes it. Companies stop hiring, investors stop spending, trade stops flowing. Remember what happened earlier this year? The moment those tariff announcements hit, markets convulsed. The S&P 500 plummeted 20% in mere weeks. And here's what's fascinating. Corporate earnings hadn't collapsed. Balance sheets hadn't imploded. What caused the crash? Pure fear, psychological terror. Fear accomplished what fundamentals couldn't. Investors stampeded for the exits. The entire system locked up. If that uncertainty had persisted, we would have witnessed a full-scale recession materialize in real time. But then something interesting occurred. Trade negotiations with China and India showed hints of progress. Suddenly, optimism flooded back in. Markets rebounded. Investors talked themselves into believing the danger had evaporated. Crisis averted, right? Time to celebrate? Wrong. What we're witnessing isn't recovery. It's delusion. The threat didn't vanish. It went underground. Look at corporate America right now. Surface level looks magnificent. Profits elevated. Financial statements appear solid, but I've studied economic history for decades, and this exact illusion precedes every major collapse. Before the dot-com implosion, profits were astronomical. Before 2008, companies were reporting record growth. Then profit margins started compressing, layoffs commenced, everything reversed with shocking speed. Examine today's numbers carefully. Profit margins remain elevated, yes, but watch what's happening. They're flattening. Across manufacturing, retail, transportation sectors, they're already contracting. It's subtle, easy to miss, but it's there. And when corporate profits start tightening, management responds with predictable brutality, cost reduction, which means workforce elimination. That's the danger zone we've entered. The economy remains brittle from recent shocks. Household savings depleted, debt levels catastrophic. Inflation has devoured purchasing power. The average American family possesses less financial buffer than any point in the past decade. Corporations are overstretched. Governments are overextended. The Federal Reserve finds itself trapped between persistent inflation and decelerating growth. Their policy toolkit nearly empty. This is what makes the current moment so perilous. America is not prepared. Financially, no. Politically, no. Psychologically, absolutely not. Everyone's acting like we've passed the crisis, but the pressure beneath the surface has reached historic levels. The stock market's ascent has become a distraction, a comfortable fantasy concealing fundamental weakness. Zoom out. Examine a century of market behavior. You'll notice something chilling. Every major peak, every moment of maximum confidence, every celebration of invincibility. They all occurred immediately before catastrophic downturns. 1929, 2000, 2007. The pattern repeats with mathematical precision. The trigger changes. The psychology remains identical. The instant everyone believes the system is unbreakable is precisely when it shatters. And we've arrived at that moment again. What just occurred, this tariff escalation, this renewed trade volatility, this silent deceleration in employment, might appear trivial now, but it's the spark that ignites a very long fuse. Economic systems don't explode in 24 hours. They erode, gradually, invisibly, confidence draining away like water through cracks in a dam. When the breaking point finally arrives, it feels sudden only to those who refuse to watch. But the warning signs already here. Unemployment rising, leading indicators falling, tariffs severing trade flows, businesses hesitating, consumers stretched dangerously thin. Each signal alone seems manageable. Combined, they form a pattern that history has recognized time and time again. America isn't prepared, not because we lack data, not because we lack warnings, but because we refuse to believe them. It's easier to celebrate market records than confront the fragility underneath. It's easier to convince ourselves this time is different than accept that economic cycles are inevitable, that downturns are built into the architecture of capitalism itself. But truth doesn't negotiate with optimism. Reality doesn't care about sentiment. Right now, the economy is balanced on a knife's edge, strong enough to stand, weak enough to collapse with one miscalculation. Perhaps another oil shock delivers the final blow. Perhaps another tariff wave. Perhaps a geopolitical event nobody's considering. Perhaps a banking crisis emerging from commercial real estate. Perhaps a debt crisis as interest payments become unsustainable. Whatever arrives, the system will lack the flexibility it once possessed. Previously, the Federal Reserve could slash rates to zero, inject massive liquidity, and reignite growth mechanically. But this time, inflation persists stubbornly. Government debt has reached astronomical levels approaching $35 trillion. Corporate debt is equally excessive. Monetary stimulus risks igniting new inflation crises rather than solving existing problems. Fiscal stimulus, the government is already running trillion-dollar deficits during supposed good times. That's what makes this situation genuinely unprecedented. The traditional rescue mechanisms might backfire catastrophically. We've used up our ammunition. So what happens next? The most probable scenario isn't dramatic collapse, it's gradual deterioration, the kind that appears calm until suddenly it isn't. A few weak employment reports that economists dismiss as temporary softness, a decline in corporate earnings blamed on seasonal adjustments, a market correction characterized as healthy profit taking, then layoffs spreading like wildfire across sectors, consumer spending contracting, credit markets seizing, business investment vanishing, then panic, full-scale panic, each phase feeding the next until the illusion of stability completely disintegrates. And when that moment arrives, people will utter the same words they always do. Nobody could have predicted this. The economic data looked solid. This came out of nowhere. But that's a lie we tell ourselves for comfort. The evidence was always here. The patterns were visible. The warnings were screaming. They're always here. We just choose not to listen until it's too late. If you found this analysis valuable, hit that like and subscribe button. Share your perspective in the comments. I want to hear what you're seeing in your corner of the economy. And remember, I'm not a financial advisor. This is educational content designed to help you think critically about economic forces. Your financial decisions are your responsibility. Stay informed, stay vigilant, take care of yourself out there.